Okay, so we are back. So, yep. Well, this has really been a special session with our brother Ricky. So we've already discussed a lot with regards to the operation of Pegu, and of course, later in the second part, so we'll ask some more questions. So, but feel free if you have any questions to Ricky, feel free to shout it out, and then we'll read it for him so he can give us his opinion on things. There you go. Ricky's back. Go.
Alright, welcome back.
Yeah,
Hey.
welcome back. That was quick, right? Okay, so, but thank goodness for the signal. It's cooperating now. A while ago, it was a bit, the signal was a bit tricky. Maybe because it's raining here right now. So, but so far so good. Okay, so, a while ago with regards to the system, because this morning I had a class, because now it's online learning. But our topic today was pretty much point system inventory. So one bottle, 0.50, etc. But for example, in Pegu, how do you do? What's your type of inventory there? I mean, what so far, or in New York in general, what's the inventory system like?
Sure. Well, great question. Especially that's a really good question. When it comes to inventory, I'm so glad that we're talking about this, and we're not talking about like tomorrow. But I know. You really want to talk about bartending, dude? This is like talking about like logistics and not about tactics. This is like a whole different level.
Yeah.
So we're gonna talk logistics. All right. So when it comes to logistics, it's a really important. It's really important to have a proper inventory, not only to know what you have, but also what you don't have, and also ultimately for your P&L at the end of the month to make sense. Did you make money? Did you lose money? Right? And so when it comes to inventory, a lot of people use a lot of different systems to keep track of these items. But for us, and for I think the overwhelming majority of the programs that I'm familiar with, use the point system. They use the point system. They do a lot. A lot of places weigh their bottles. There's a lot of really great companies out there who will come and do it for you for a pretty penny. But in times like this, of course, it's very DIY right now. So what would basically result is a hand count. One of the benefits of having a hand count, especially when you're operating at this level, is that you become intimately aware of what is available to you, not only as inventory, but also creatively. And also, if this like random person on the fly is just like, hey, do you have this random thing? You'll know, because you're the one who counted it.
Exactly.
I have a love-hate relationship with inventory, like I think a lot of people do, right?
Don't we all?
Yeah, it's like they always say, don't take the keys. Don't take the keys, because when you take the keys, man,
you're the last one.
Oh my God, right? So when you take the keys, it also means that you have to bear a certain amount of responsibility. And that's good, because responsibility turns me on. So you get a hand count. And at one point, I think I was the custodian of $40,000 of just liquor.
Oh, really?
And I was just like, fuck. I was like, of anything, is crazy, but of booze, I'm telling you, dude. So, yeah, the many nights spent just counting things. I learned how to count fast. That taught me really a lot about that. Wow, inventory. Love inventory.
Yeah, but point system is good. I mean, like today, my main mantra when I'm training newbies or those who are really interested, it's are three letters. Memorize, M. F is familiarize. Then O is organize. So it's really that simple, because at the end of the day, just like what you said, if you memorize your bar, well, whether you like it or not, you have to know. And knowing is like really drilling it here, that okay, I have like how many bottles and how many brands of this, blah blah blah, and then as soon as you know it, then now you have to check it. So familiarization, and then now it's time to tidy the place up. So like, okay, set all the rums here, all the gins, but it's nice to know that you also follow a point system, because I think point system has flexibility. You don't want to be really a goody two shoe that, hey, I have only 25 shots, okay, I don't want to, anything happens to that shot, then you gotta pay for it. So you know what I mean. So
yeah,
I think,
well, also you have to taste it, right? So like
exactly.
you have to be familiar with your product, so you'll probably budget an ounce or two of that here, a little bit of there. If you're not, like if you have something that you want to share with guests, something a little bit special that you're just like, hey, if you really like this, I think that you're going to really like this too, and give them a small taste of it. It really goes a long way in creating relationships with your guests, because it lets them know what you're about. It's just like, hey,
okay,
there's a lot. Yeah, please.
But I mean, so with that being said, so does that mean, okay, when is this being discussed that, okay, guys, you're allowed to let the guests taste, or maybe, a complimentary shot? Is that discussed like when you're before the briefing, or is that an unwritten rule as long as you declare it in the inventory? How does that work in your side of town?
No, it's always declared. So there's that. Okay, so there's this. If you go up to your bartender and you say, "Hey, no drinking without me," what that means is that there's a boundary there. That's good. So you create that boundary. You're just like, okay, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It means that I need to be there. And when you say that, it means that it creates this extra step of, okay, now I have to go get my head bartender. And in order to do this, I have to go through these steps, letting know my manager that there is an anniversary, a birthday, or we're doing a service recovery, or there's your girlfriend's there or whatever.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Right. So I think what it really comes down to is like not only inventory costs, but at a interpersonal level, and to have that accountability there between yourself and your bartenders, because at the end of the day, it's team leadership. It's 100% team leadership, because you can't do it alone, right? Because nobody runs a bar alone unless you're Superman, and you know what, we all get into bartending for different reasons, and when we create that camaraderie there, that what's called unit continuity is priceless. I'm telling you, when shit gets crazy unexpectedly at 4 a.m. and a tour bus pulls up and you've got 1 billion people trying to knock down your door when you're just trying to close down the place, you're gonna want that guy. You're gonna want that guy there. So I don't know. There's a lot of different ways that you can build camaraderie. Shots are one way to do it, and we do that. We're very judicious about when we employ them, and also it's important, I think, not only to when you're doing this, to set an intention behind it. It's why am I doing this? If you're just taking a shot, if you're taking a shot just to be fuck it, I'm gonna take a shot, you're throwing the shot away.
Exactly.
In my opinion. I mean, if you're going to do that, but if you're coming at it from a place of hey, I'm doing this to create a sense of belonging, to create a sense of inclusivity, to let somebody in on a side of your bar program that they're not used to seeing, and to make a big deal out of people, because when people come into your bar, they are smarter, more handsome, and funnier than they are when they're not at your bar. And I don't say that to suck up to anyone. I say that because it's a fact. It's a fact, because when you come up those stairs, you gotta. Dale DeGraff said this perfectly. When you come up those stairs, or when you come into the bar, you have to bring a little bit of the party with you. Nobody comes to the bar like when you're coming up to a place. Are you doing it to get love, or are you doing it to give love? And when you come at it from a place when you're trying to give love, you cannot be stopped. So basically, setting attention with everything, including like taking shots. So.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We have guests here, Marlo and Marlo. Okay. So hi guys. Thank you for tuning in. Okay. Let's go back to what you said about the tipping culture. Because
Sure.
I've interviewed I guess the Jin Chan here also was in the same neighborhood.
Jin Chan, man.
Yeah, man. Angel Share.
Dude, this guy knows how to freaking hustle.
Yes,
Dude,
yes. Double chicken, please.
Dude,
Yeah.
it takes a lot to try and open a bar. I have never seen anyone work so fucking hard to make that shit happen. And it really imaginative way too. So hey, Jan Chan, if you're listening, you're awesome, bro. Keep on doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Yes. No, he was my batchmate in Legacy when like 2016. So from that time on, I've always kept in touch because I like his of course his demeanor in life, his mindset and his hustle, like what you said. And now it's moving. The double chicken please is up and running. So okay. So regarding the tipping culture, okay, from Seattle to New York, is it the same? Because basically here in the Philippines, tipping culture is 50-50. Because at the end of the day, there is like a borderline between, okay, I experienced this before. It's R18. Okay, so I remember I went to a strip club. Okay, I went to a strip club like 2010. Right?
Fucking love you,
well, it's R18. I just ordered for a beer because I didn't know. I was a newbie in US, right? I went to a strip club and then I'm not really sure of the culture. So, but at that time I only had like $1 or $2 to give us a tip, and of course, with that being said, I got a frown from the lady, or not even a frown, worse than a frown, and but for me, like. I was shocked and of course at the same time when I left, I kind of was wondering, okay, so what's the standard when you give a tip, because I don't know, it's
Sure.
maybe ignorance or innocence, I don't know which is which, but because in the Philippines, on a personal note, because we don't really, if you give us a tip, thank you very much, but we won't, although at the same time. It's kind of dangerous to pay too much attention to a certain guest because he gives more, because the other guest will be jealous. So you know what I mean? So it's hard to tread that water, especially I think it's culture, because it's culture based, so but
100%.
how does that work how did you adjust to that? Was it already known to you?
So I grew up with tipping culture. I've got a love-hate relationship with it. Honestly, it's the only model I've ever worked in, to be honest. That doesn't mean that it's the only way. If we could pay our bartenders a living wage, and we were set up in a way that allowed us to make all the ends meet and to pay ourselves and the bartenders a living wage and do away with tipping altogether, I think that would be ideal. I just don't think that we've found a way to do that yet. I don't imagine that I have the solutions, or that we'll have a solution tomorrow, and a lot of people have tried to find models for it to work. And I think that what we're finding right now is that the way it's set up for small businesses in particular, makes it really, really difficult for that ideal model to exist. Whether it comes to like city ordinances, or when it comes to like just the sheer cost of overhead. Really, at the end of the day, I really believe that any small business owner who has been wants to be able to pay a livable wage, and they would if the system was put in place where it made it a sustainable business. But when we come to like the cultural part of it, and on the individual level, the tipping culture varies from country to country, like you said, and also from varying from region to region, and within that, from venue to venue. So if you're at tipping is going to be a little bit different than someplace a little bit more casual and laid back, and it worked both places. At one point, I had the keys to the world's most influential cocktail bar and the New York City's second oldest continuously operating tavern on my keychain at the same time, and it was so drastic to see. But instead, there's like pluses. There's like pluses and minuses to being at each place. When it comes to tipping, at least in New York City, in places like where you'd like sit down at a table, it's generally agreed upon that it's between 18 to 20%. That's not a hard and fast rule, because as New York City, at this hemisphere, this is like, be there for a second. Still there?
Yeah, no worries. It's breaking up a little bit, but
yeah, it is the transportation hub. So it's kind of like the Mecca, or that everyone's from someplace else, and with that, they carry their culture with them. And so it's kind of like what you're saying with like the lady in the strip club who gave you a stanky look because you left her $1 as opposed to like $100. There are ways to educate people about what the general tipping culture is. At least when I'm traveling, I don't really have any shame about like asking what's the tipping culture here? Culture. That's what's one there too. But I like to show my appreciation, especially when people are caring for me, that I like to return that in some sort of way. And that's where it comes from for me. It's not like an 18 to 20% rule type of thing. But on like the intention is different. The intention behind the tipping is different. Okay, so like at least in the United States, a lot of the times, the West Coast of the United States, and this is a vast generalization. I'm just gonna say that, and I can say this because I'm from the West Coast, is that a lot of tipping culture is based around the fact that we're meeting certain expectations. Not that, hey, it was fast, so I'm going to give you this tip. It's like, hey, 20%. This is like I'm expecting this. On the East Coast, tipping culture is used differently in the sense that it's transactional. Generally, it's generally agreed that like, okay, well, we're making like however many dollars an hour, and that's going to cover taxes, but that's not what's paying your rent at the end of the day. What's paying your rent at the end of the day is going to be the tips. And so like from that aspect, that's where it interacts differently with the bartender. But we all have jobs, we're making money, and we're doing it kind of the same way, but it's being presented in a different kind of way. And as long as you're like aware of where these things are coming from, just like being a Filipino in the world, that like you're constantly assimilating and to the different cultures around us. And so I guess for better or for worse, that's just something that I was able to adjust to And that something,
Nice,
hopefully in the future, we can find a better way to do it. But you know.
Yep. No, it's interesting because I mean that of course because I work in a cruise ship also. So I mean there.
Oh, yeah, so that's gonna be like everyone's from everywhere, right?
Yeah. So there it's a different ball game. I mean I'm okay, but I mean of course it's dollars already. But sometimes again no expectation. You make them laugh. You care for them. You be as genuine as you be. Sometimes, but there's a range. Sometimes they give you as low as a 5 and to as high as 200. So something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so okay, but no expectations and no scratching of the head if you don't get what you expect to get. So
Yeah.
I mean, for those listening, especially because we have some young, up and coming bartenders who are in college right now. So and aspiring ones. So because tips is generally also varies from culture to culture, country to country is what you say, and establishment to establishment. So okay, thank you for that. Next, I want to ask about your shake because I saw yeah, man.
Okay. So
I'm guessing who taught you that,
okay, all right. So
or did you develop that?
I get this. I've gotten this questions a couple times. Everyone thinks that's the only way to shake. That's not the only way to shake. Probably what you're thinking about is this very snappy motion where it's like basically creating a wave and figure eight at the same time. So here's what it is. So for that specific shake, and use a lot of different shakes. Just like you can stir a lot of different ways. There's different kinds of kung fu. That you would use a different shake for a daiquiri than you would for a Jin mule or something.
Exactly.
Whether or not there are muddled ingredients in your tin, that's going to change the way you shake. Whether or not it's like like if you have egg white in there, you are going to change the way you shake, and that's just like you're not gonna. If you're working in like the garage or something, you're not going to use a hammer for everything. You've got other tools in your toolkit. So you're not going to use a hammer for everything. For this one, it's very fast. It's very, very fast. And the goal is to to chill quickly, dilute slowly. And a lot of people are going to call bullshit, and that's okay. But let me explain what's happening here. Give me like 2 seconds. All right. Yo.
Yeah, we can. Okay, guys, listen, watch and learn.
All right, cool. So let me adjust this a little bit. Hopefully you can see that. So anyway, let me put that marker. Let's see. Okay, so. All chilling, all let's shake everything. Listen, it only really comes down to 2 things. One of the first questions that Giuseppe Gonzalez ever asked me when we were working on Suffolk Arms was, how does ice make things cold? How does ice make things cold? And we basically distilled it down to this. All chilling and dilution is a function of initial temperature and surface melt. And I think that's something that a lot of people now are familiar with. At the time, we had very little ways to articulate how these things actually work. And the more we tried to explain it, the more verbose we became, the less people were able to understand. So, this is what it comes down to. All chilling is a function initial temperature of surface area and of surface melt. So, what that means for us is that have three things that we know already. When we shake things, we want to change things. We want to change it from one state into a different state. And the way that we bring things to temperature and dilution is through the manipulation, or through knowing these variables before we go go underway. As soon as you close that shaker, or more realistically, as soon as the liquid hits the ice, changes start occurring. And once you slam your shaker shut, that means that is a closed system. Nothing goes in, nothing goes out. The only thing that changes is the temperature and the dilution. So, what does this mean? Function of the initial temperature. It means that the colder your ice is coming out of it, going into the shaker, it's going to affect the time that you're going to be able to shake and the duration that you're going to be able to shake. So you might be like, oh my God, isn't all ice just like, isn't it all at 0 degrees? No, it isn't. So like, if you have your ice in the ice bin, it's been sitting for a while, it is going to be at 0 degrees. But that 0 degrees is only going to be happening at the surface of the cube. So if you have your ice cube or something, and you do one of these, you're going to see a lot of water come off. It's surface melt. That's not going to affect the system in any significant way. But at the surface of the ice cube, it hovers at or around 0 degrees Celsius. And what happens at 0 degrees Celsius? Water freezes. So you've got simultaneous melting and freezing at the same time on the surface of this cube. But if it's been sitting out and it's tempered ice, you can count that it's going to be at or around 0 degrees. But case in point, the Sasha Petrosky School of Bartending dictated that a lot of the ice would come straight out the freezer. Sammy and Mickey, attaboy, their block style ice, those fist-sized chunks of cubes, they come directly out of the freezer. So instead of sitting inside the ice caddy, what you're really looking at is a realistic initial temperature of -19 Celsius. It's so fucking cold. They serve the coldest daiquiris in the city. They serve the coldest martinis in the city, and part of the reason why is because they keep their ice below 0 as opposed to at 0. So that's why it's going to be a little bit different from bartender to bartender and from ice chunk to ice chunk. Surface area. So the average. So it's 1 inches on each side of a cold draft cube. I use 4 of those for my shake, so that's like 34.7 square inches of space. You could achieve a similar effect using one fist-sized chunk of ice, but I didn't have that capability over at Pegu, so I use 4 cold draft cubes. So if I can, so I know that this is going to be the initial temperature at or around 0. I know that's 34.7 square inches. I know that the surface melt, if I wick it away like a Japanese bartender and just get rid of that shit, then I know that that surface area and initial temperature is going to be available to the system in order to chill it down. Why is this important? Guess what? When you're going into the system, yes, you'll be able to feel it, but even more than quality, I think that consistency is something that's prized over the term when it comes to cocktail programs. You don't want a daiquiri to be stunning one night and then just to be shitty another night. What you want is consistency. And so that's where this particular shake for me came in. Now, going into the shake, the reason why I shake that way is because it's the most consistent results for the product that I was trying to produce. And that in this specific case was a Pegu Club or a daiquiri. So when we talk about chilling and dilution, bartenders and scientists will refer to what is called the dilution curve, which is basically if you plot on the graph chilling and dilution, there is a sweet spot where those two things intersect, where you reach approximately 25% dilution and have a drink that's colder than the ice that was chilling it. To me, how do you make something colder than its initial temperature? That's insane to me. How do you make something colder than ice? And you do that with a lot of violent action. So here's how it usually goes. And I'm going to demonstrate with this block of wood here because it's handy. There are a lot of different kinds of shakers. When it came to the work that I was doing, it was a fairly high volume. So, it's a dark and disruptive environment, and you've just got a bunch of people behind it. So it behooves us to create a system that is as easy to use as possible, with equipment that is rugged and maybe not necessarily be as elegant as you want it to be. So for us, we did not use those 3-piece cobbler shakers or Parisian shakers, or even a Boston shaker in the case of like Employees Only uses Boston shakers. We use 10 on 10, so we were using a 10 on 10 set, an 1828 set. So when we're playing the 1828 set, it allows us to do a couple of really, really cool things. The 1828 set for bartenders who aren't familiar with it, it just basically means that it's like a metal tin and a metal tin. One's bigger than the other. You mix in one, you shake and dispense with the other. Right. So what would happen is I would shift the dilution curve earlier so that I have more control over the final product. And the way that happens is by opening up the surface area, those 34.7 square inches that were originally available to me at a certain temperature. I'm going to try to break that open so I can maximize it, or for something that's really, really cold. And one way we do that is not unlike using force if you're a baseball player trying to swing a bat. If you're trying to make it cold early, a really good way to do that is to step forward with one of your feet, using the rotational force of your body to swing your shaker. So the movement would go, you'd step forward, bring it up, and then you bring it down really, really swiftly. The idea is to take the tin, move forward, use the rotational force of your body again, and move through the ground. So you boom. And if you do it early enough, really cold ice wants to shatter. Warm ice wants to cleave. If you've worked with large cubes of ice and you've worked with different types of temperatures, you'll know that like when it's really cold and out of the freezer, it'll like turn into a powdery dust if you smack it. But if you let it warm up, you let it temper, it'll split in half, 2 pieces as opposed to a million. So if you really want to open it up, make it cold early, that's one way to do it. But when I shake using that rotational force, basically what I'm doing is creating a double helix on the inside of the shaker. So when you look at, let's just say for all intents and purposes, this is your shaker, right? That's probably pretty rudimentary. All right, cool. That's a shaker. And typically when you're shaking, you've got some back and forth action here. And whether or not you realize that what you're doing is you're creating channels inside the medium being your cocktail on the inside of this system. So you've got solids and you've got liquids, right? So your ice is going to be introducing a couple of things. One, it's going to be made cold. It's going to bring into water. And then what's another important ingredient that we don't talk about that's introduced by shaking? air. It's really important to introduce air into this system. One of the ways that we do that is by shaking back and forth. And what's happening is this cube is going back and forth, boom, 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 creating channels, bubbles, not necessarily bubbles, but channels, voids, that when they collapse back to themselves, become the aeration in your cocktail. That's how that happens. You've basically got a bullet going through here, creating channels that collapse on themselves, creating bubbles, microfoam, if you're moving fast enough. But if you're going like this, it's different than going like this. So what you're doing, I'll indicate the z-axis here. So when you're going like this, what you're seeing is that there's rotational force happening here. What does that mean for this in here? You're changing the motion. Your channel, the size and the size of your channel, and the likelihood that those bubbles will form will increase if you're spinning it. It's like taking this length of wire, if it was like wire or rope or whatever, but then extending that so that you have more opportunity to add more air. When we add air, it changes the way that we experience taste, and it changes the way that we experience, more importantly, texture, right? So one thing that I learned from working at Starbucks is that when you're shaking things like tea, for example, air makes things taste sweeter. You know, so when you put things, it means that you aren't necessarily tied to using varying types of sugar or sugar products to sweeten a cocktail. All you've put in there is air, and you've sweetened it just using your hands. And when it comes to things that are like can be tart and bracing, like a Pegu cocktail, like a Pegu Club cocktail, which if you're not familiar with it, you can make it at home. It's basically a gin margarita with bitters. Make yourself a gin margarita with bitters. You'll find out how tart and bracing that is. And depending on the taste of your guests, you have the opportunity, because you have knowledge of how to manipulate those variables to a known result, right? So if you got someone who has a very dry palate, one thing that I might do for that very specific cocktail is to shake the fuck out of it hard and fast up front, breaking the ice open, that surface area that is at negative 19 degrees Celsius to a system that's at room temperature, and plunging it down below zero really, really, really quick. And what happens at 0 degrees Celsius? Things freeze, right? Water stops or it stops turning from ice into water. And when it stops turning from ice into water, that just leaves a solid slug of ice going back and forth like this. And so you get even more air introduced into the system without introducing more water. So people think I shake for the water. I don't shake for the water. I shake to control the water, but really it's to introduce more air. So thank you so much for that question. It was, I was trying to find some way to articulate that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that one, as like what Martin said, wow, why didn't
All right.
like, first, well, follow up on that. So, for you, what is, okay, basically, if you're using a different ice, you will take a different.
So I'm having trouble hearing you on this end, but I'm going to try to do my best to answer your question. I believe the question was, would I change the way that I shake based on the different type of drink that I'm making? So, no? Ooh, does the shake change when you have different ice? Hell yes, it does. Okay, so a while back, I had the opportunity to work with a number of different bartenders and learn from them, and for them to teach me on the different ways that they shake. So, yeah, long story short, it does. 100%. Also for these reasons. So there are two I would say 2 or 3 different schools of thought, at least in New York City, and at least in the programs that I've studied under. Different philosophies when it comes to shaking and for ice in general. So the general consensus is that when you're using smaller chunks of ice, you have less control. That is true. That is 100% true. Because the more surface area you have, the less time it's going to take for the system to reach equilibrium, or the point at which it stops chilling, it stops diluting, and it's just the way it's going to be. This is the coldest it's ever going to be. So if you use a larger chunk of ice, like say like a fist-sized chunk of ice, like Richard Baccato, who runs 100 weight out in Queens, is in the back room of a bar out there. He uses fist-sized chunks of ice for his cocktails. You're going to have to shake a little bit longer. I know guys who have had to have shoulder surgery. Let's try saying that 5 times fast. Shoulder surgery, because of the way our body mechanics were working. I should probably say this body is different. I only work the way that I work because that's what works for me, and that everyone is going to have to find their own shake. The way that I shake is not going to be the way that is going to be best for you, and that's going to be something that you're going to have to find yourself. So when you're shaking, pay attention to how you feel. Not only like physically, but also emotionally. Learn where you're holding your tension. For me, I hold a lot of tension in my jaw. I hold a lot of tension in my shoulders, and that's pretty common for bartenders. So when you're working that way, the word ergonomics comes up a lot. But I also think that when it comes to ergonomics, we tend to rely very heavily upon the literature that's been written, and that's good. But one size does not fit all. Back in World War II, when new fighters were being developed, the School of Ergonomics basically said that, okay, there's going to be a standardized way for all pilots, the cockpit will be built for a certain height of pilot with certain proportions. But what they very quickly found was that a one-size-fits-all fits nobody. Really comes down to be able to find out what works for you, find what feels good, to do that. So I know a lot of guys who shake like this, a lot of people who shake like this. It really depends on what you're trying to do, experience. But when it comes down to ice, that's just one more thing to be mindful about. So, it's going to hurt. They will probably be colder if you're taking the ice straight out of the freezer, and I think that's something we pretty well count on. And with smaller ice, just like you would stir differently, you would shake differently. I'm sorry, Rich, I have trouble put the control into the hands of the guest, especially with someone like who's like an old-fashioned daiquiri, like 20 to 25%. You have less control. That is true. That is 100% true. Because the more surface area you have, the less time it's going to take for the system to reach equilibrium, or the point at which it stops chilling, it stops diluting, and it's just the way it's going to be. This is the coldest it's ever going to be. So,
on dilution?
Between 20 and 25% for me. Now, that doesn't mean that for like dilution, yes. But I think that when we talk about that, there's a long and a short answer to that. And it really depends on what you're serving. So, and it really behooves us to think about the recipe we're creating as opposed to relying upon hard and fast to 25%. You might think of like an old-fashioned, right? An old-fashioned for us is a pampered shot of booze. We try to do as little to it as possible to let that whiskey shine, right? You know, like, so I might ask you a question, like, is that going to taste really great at 25% dilution? I can't be sure to say that it will or if it won't. And it really depends on the proof of the whiskey that you're using too, right? So if you're like, if you're an old-fashioned with old overhold 80 proof versus Rittenhouse at 100 proof, your desired dilution is going to be a little bit different. And in those cases, it gives us a really good opportunity to put the control into the hands of the guest, especially with someone like who's like an old-fashioned or martini drinkers who are notoriously, I wouldn't say, we're partial to how we have martinis, right? Because there's like a million questions when it comes with that. Or something like a daiquiri, like 20 to 25% dilution, because you're not only fighting with the heat of the booze, you're also balancing against inconsistent citrus, right? Because like citrus is, you know, it's of nature. It's not going to be, you know, like standardized bricks. It's not going to be doing that. Because it's from the earth. It's just that's how it is. And then, right? So a lot of times, like you want to talk about communing with nature, dude. Like that's tasting your produce and knowing where it's at during that season and at that day. I cannot taste everything. Absolutely. Holy shit. Hold on. Sorry, I gotta give you a soapbox. I gotta give us a little soapbox speech real quick. All right. So when you are working, I found that when someone would come and straw taste my work, I would become immediately defensive when I was first starting out. I was like, what, you don't think I'm doing it right? Listen. Fucking listen. To jump out of a plane and I had my buddies with me, I would want them checking my shit and making sure that I was squared away before I jumped. Somebody else tasting your drink before you serve it serves a lot of different functions, and it really gives us a lot of advantage to step away from our ego and just be like, okay, well, why is this person tasting my beverage? Well, maybe we're trying to learn something. We're coming over, it's like, why are you doing it that way? Also, to make sure that your partner isn't going to be serving a drink that's going to be sent back, and that might be viewed as insurance against a failure. So I'm always just like, hey, will you please straw taste this for me? Because at that point, my palate is probably suffering from fatigue from like straw tasting. And it allows them to add to their vocabulary of expression, you know, like the same way that we would learn vocabulary to express our ideas through language. You can do the same by developing a vocabulary there. So you're helping them learn too. End of soapbox rap. Thank you for attending my TED Talk. Yeah.
Nice. No, I mean, these are small things that it's very important, especially, you know, at this day and age, especially here in the Philippines, because the cocktail culture is steadily growing, and you know, in fact, the next question would be, okay, I'm pretty sure you know about the bottled cocktails, right?
Okay.
But when it comes to that, my question would be, let's say you're producing around 50 bottles of bottled cocktails. Let's say a margarita. Let's say you're producing 50 500 ml bottles of margarita, right? Then
I'm doing the math in my head. I'm trying.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, there's no math here, but the question would be, you bottle them, is it necessary to put them on the fridge right away? Or
Right
not
away?
really?
I think that when you're the same principles that apply to batching are the same principles that apply to building on the fly. And that means that freshness is bestest, right? Think of what happens when we make soup. When we're cooking, when we're doing savory cooking and we're making soup. You'll find that it tastes one way the day that you make it, but more often than not, it's going to taste differently on the third to fifth day. So if you're making like a consommé, or if you're making like just stock, the flavors are going to change, and that's by virtue of the introduction of heat, and but also of oxygen. As soon as we mix any two items together, whether it be citrus and a liqueur, or spirit and a vermouth, as soon as those two things come into contact, things start changing. They just start changing so quickly. I realize that bottled cocktails are kind of a necessity right now. Let's be honest. Like, for when it comes to being able to stay in business, bottled cocktails, you got to do it. Because it's a way for us to stay connected with our guests, and also a way to generate revenue, so that when things get better, when they will, that we're able to come out on the other side of that company. And one of the ways that we're able to ensure that it's the best possible experience is to keep things cold. For me in particular, I learned how to batch for like thousands. In the last couple of years, we raised 3.5 million for No Kid Hungry, Meals on Wheels, and the Beard Foundation through batching, essentially. Through doing events that people could come to, and to the fundraisers and stuff. So when we're batching on that level, one of the things that we did was we kept everything as cold as possible. And when we were adjusting, we were doing those in small increments as possible, because you can never take away. The same thing applies to oxygen and to the reactions that occur when we combine ingredients. So one of the big enemies to the final product is oxygen. As much as we're trying to introduce it, we also have to be mindful that when we're introducing that as an ingredient, it is also inducing change. So when we add air to something, in the case of like mixing this margarita, clock starts ticking. Boom, that clock starts ticking. It's going to taste different. And we know this through science, that even 4 hours later, it's going to taste different. We can maximize the amount of time that product is viable by keeping it under refrigeration. I would say that you would do that for everything, because, when you open vermouth, what are you trying to do? Trying to slow oxygen. Yes, it's oxidized, but it has a shelf life of about, you can reach that by refrigerating it. Compare that to something just as good 3 weeks later. So, short story, try to keep oxygen out of it as much as you can, and slow that process. You can process, maximize its shelf life by keeping it at a consistent temperature, the same way that you keep, say, champagne at cellar temp without fluctuations. Yeah.
Okay, so does that mean being said, so you don't necessarily have to put those 50 bottles in the fridge right away after production?
I would. I 100% would. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you're working fresh, if I had just squeezed limes for 50 margaritas, then I would want to preserve that work for as long as I possibly could. Because I've been in situations where I've created 187 milliliter bottles of different cocktails, and also it depends if you have juice, it depends if you have sugar. But as a hard and fast rule, I would just say refrigeration is the way to go, especially since it's not going to be consumed on premises. Maybe the taste would be different, but if the clientele that you're serving is like really into like super taster connoisseur level, I would insure against. If anything,
Exactly.
It's insurance. It protects you against loss.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, I agree. Well, it's good to know that we're on the same side, because like there are some bottle cocktail business is kind of tricky, and in fact it's a different story. Let's say it's room temperature,
Mm-hmm.
because it's gonna be delivered to your home. You're gonna be delivered to your home. Then you're gonna pour it in a glass with ice.
Mm-hmm.
So this is alcohol based. There's alcohol basically. So there's pretty much rapid change of dilution there because of the temperature, right? So
Right.
it depends on how potent or how much concentration there is in the bottle cocktail, and how it will taste once dilution is added to the ice. So I am also doing the same thing, and it's good to know that you also share the same thing when it comes to refrigeration, because perishable, just like what you said, it's also food in a way. So you don't want it to reach that danger zone. So they say, right? And that of course oxygen, it will change. I agree 100%. And yeah, okay, so guys, you heard it from Ricky also. By the way, just say hi to John Bunaan. He's also one of our Pinoy bartenders in Hong Kong this time. And then Javel Tap, Junto Sapin. All right. Okay, so maybe last two questions before we get cut again. First question is this a very interesting night, man? Thank you in advance before we go to the question. Next question would be, okay, what's your take on tiki? Being a Filipino Filipino American, what's your take on tikis?
All right, cool. So I'm so glad you asked, because hopefully through this conversation I'll be able to develop how I feel about this. So for those of you who are either familiar with tiki or new to tiki, the way that I understand tiki is that it's not so much a cultural thing as it is a mindset. Yes, there are like things that are the tradition, but a lot of that is imagination and nostalgia for that was brought over in the 1950s from American GIs who had gone over to the Pacific Theater and brought the memories and the feeling of that kind of like Polynesian escapism to the United States, and wish to recreate that there. Now, that creates a lot of questions for us today, right? Does that mean is tiki, like, I guess let's just call it out, man. Is tiki racist, right? And I think that's something that a lot of people that are struggling with to answer today. I'm working on it myself, because if we look at the history of tiki, some of the best tiki bars in the world, the legendary ones, they exist in a way that a lot of bars historically have existed, which is like not actually owned by the people who work them, and the influence being rendered by the people who work there. So one of the original tiki bars was not actually owned by the man whose name was on the marquee. It was actually owned by his wife, and he didn't actually own that business. When they divorced, his wife got the business and all the intellectual property to go along with it. And then genius leveraged this into kind of a business model that could be ported out, kind of similar to Guinness or to Coca-Cola, out to different parts of the world, not only like economically but also culturally, right? So it almost kind of, if you really think about it in terms of like in types of art and expression, one might equate this to what's called camp.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm gonna cut you because we're gonna get cut. So let's reset this. Let's continue the conversation. Okay. Sorry, we have 1 minute left. So this is a good story. I think it's to us. Okay. See you again. Let's end the conversation. I'll reset it. And okay. See you.